All right, and welcome to the next episode of FinOps Friday. Today's show is really all about understanding and working with the more traditional side of finance. We're putting the fin in FinOps today. The cloud has come along with all of its fantastic offerings. When you need to do cloud, you need to also make sure that you're working with your traditional finance, making sure that the bill still needs to get paid. Someone's going to ask some questions of you. You need to be able to answer the questions that they have. And that's why we've got Todd Tucker here today from the TBM Council. Todd, across to you. Quick introduction, where you're from, and we'll talk about TBM in a minute.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I'm currently living in Kansas City and grew up kind of in the area, but kind of been around the block a few times. And, my background is I started as a financial auditor with Ernst & Young and, grew up kind of in the accounting world there, but quickly got into IT auditing, looking at the more technical aspects of clients' environments, the control situations, things like this. Of course, all this was long before public cloud was even probably thought of. Although I think at the time we were talking grid computing and things like that. But I had the fortune of moving into that practice for EY, which really kind of set me on a certain trajectory with my career. Did a lot of work with security, a lot of InfoSec, cybersecurity work before it was called cybersecurity, and just really enjoyed it. But I moved into the software world about 20 years ago and worked for a company that did security software and then systems management type software. Joined Apptio in 2010. So I've been with Apptio for just now over 11 years and just, have loved this job, had the chance to, help start the TBM Council and have served as its head of research and standards for years now. Launched a education program, certification, similar to what FinOps has with the FinOps certification. Of course, ours is for TBM, and then had the chance to write a book, which was a real passion of mine. Was writing that, researching for it, all of that. So it's been a wild ride. I enjoy it a whole lot.
Awesome, excellent. Now, technology business management, TBM, in a lot of ways, it sort of looks as though it's the predecessor to FinOps. We've got the cloud, the issues with the cloud that it brings to finance. And it's like, well, this is what IT was bringing to finance before cloud came along. Is that a fair sort of assessment and a very rough view? Like, help us understand exactly what is TBM, what's its main components, and what does it actually give to the business, and why is it useful?
Yeah. TBM, it was born out of IT financial management, which has really been something in place for decades. It has a long history. It's something, though, that for the longest time was really the concern of just finance people. It was largely kind of controllership and accounting and cost containment, things like that. But what changed about 12, 13 years ago is it became a CIO concern. And CIOs didn't think of it as IT financial management. They saw it as business management for them. So what they wanted was something that would help them understand the cost of what they were delivering in terms that their business partners could understand. So rather than speaking in like, hey, here's what we're spending on servers and storage, or here's what we're spending on just application development or things like that, they could say, here's what we're spending on this particular solution for you, whether it's an application, whether it's a service, a lot of service oriented, or it's a product. You hear that a lot more these days. Now with TBM, they can look across their entire estate of people, of services, including cloud services, across their vendor portfolios, anything on-prem, all that, and they can understand what it is they're spending to create certain outcomes. And that allows them just to have a much better conversation, both internally and then with their business partners, and make a lot of the hard kind of decisions around trade-offs and things like that. So yeah, I think it has a lot in common with FinOps. I think FinOps, what it brought to the table was, one, domain specificity. It was like diving deep into, public cloud services, especially infrastructure and platforms. But as a result, I think you've been able to leverage, with FinOps, a lot of the automation, a lot of the policies, things like that, sometimes exist in the broader context of what CIOs are doing, and I think will start happening a lot more, but not quite as directly applicable as what you've seen there with TBM. So TBM has always kind of been, in some ways, the analog equivalent of FinOps. When you see something that you have to do with TBM, it usually means you got to get people in a room, they got to make a decision, they got to figure out how they're going to execute on that, and so forth. Some of it, they might be able to automate, but a lot of it is really things like portfolio management, optimization decisions, things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of things are in common. What I love about FinOps is that opportunity you have, because code is creating cost. You can also use code to optimize, cost and consumption and things like that.
Yeah, and what you're saying there, it became a CIO concern. Do you know what was the sort of the trigger behind that? Like, why did it become a CIO concern? And once they did become concerned and start to use TBM, what were the real benefits to the business?
Yeah. I mean, Nathan, one of the things that sort of drove the concern is an increased usage of shared stuff. And what I mean by that is, like, think back 10, 15 years ago, you had the rise of, even 20 years ago, but the rise of virtualization. It wasn't a new technology, that goes back to the mainframe days, but just the rise of that, the rise of different, methodologies and so forth, meant that they could no longer say, hey, I've got this dedicated set of stuff, of people, of infrastructure, of you name it. And so you could no longer really understand the cost of things. And so some of it was that, there was kind of this change that was going on. Another change was the financial crisis. Like, no doubt, after 2008, 2009, especially in the banking world, a lot were, struggling with capacity that wasn't properly managed. They had, kind of demand-related issues. They had all these things they needed to deal with, and they needed better transparency to do that. So I still remember Bank of America. They had, kind of two programs that they put in place after the crisis. One was tackling the demand side of of their technology estate. One was really the supply side. So on the supply side, you're doing things like squeezing vendors, finding ways to optimize the unit cost of delivery and things like that. On the demand side, they were just trying to articulate things in a way where they could get together with the business and start cutting stuff out. And so they really did that. That's a lot of what we do with TBM, is we try to marry supply and demand and be able to address both sides of that equation. So that's a big thing, but it's certainly not all about, cutting costs. I think a lot of people think of that when they think of TBM, and that's certainly one of the outcomes you see. But it, is more, especially, more recently, it's supporting the shift to like product models. It's supporting the adoption of, agile at scale models, lean portfolio management. It supports modernization decisions. It's being used for a lot of things that are really about the next generation of where we're going, right? So while it may have been born out of kind of a cost frustration, it is now, at least in organizations that do this well, they're using the data and the facts from it to drive a lot of really amazing things. We see it a lot with M&A, a lot with divestitures, where you've got this big change going on to your estate, and you need to understand, how to kind of divvy things up. Who's going to use what? How are we going to hold them accountable if we split off a business unit? And we still have to serve them, right, with things that we own. How are we going to hold them accountable and charge them for the cost properly and stuff like that? So lot of uses, which is really cool. It also sometimes makes the the killer app for it a little difficult to find.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up things like breakaways and selling off business units. I think, in the FinOps world, we're really just focused on, how do we pay this month's bill? But that sort of strategic vision and understanding, hey, the long term and the business impacts of doing this is just something that we sort of don't get exposed, and it's not part of our sort of daily job type of thing. So it's really insightful to get that. Somewhat concerning that we've still got the shared cost problem a decade later. We still haven't solved it. But I think it's also a case that, hey, the problem now is much, much larger in terms of its scale and size and what we could possibly do with it as well. So I think it's the never-ending goalpost that we have to keep aiming for as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to talk about some of the pain points that cloud delivers to finance. Now, obviously, cloud usage is very, very different to traditional IT spend and a lot of other spends in the business. And we're talking about the volume, the variability, the voraciousness of it all. What makes cloud painful for finance? Tell me, as a finance person, what are you pulling your hair out about day in, day out every time the cloud team comes along or you see something coming through from the cloud bill?
Finance people like predictability at the end of the day. Your CFO, for example, they, have to report oftentimes to, investors, to Wall Street or whatever, anticipated earnings per share and things like that. And, with tech intensive companies, especially in like banking and finance, tech can swing the EPS by a penny. And
sorry, EPS?
Earnings per share. So, they're giving that kind of guidance to investors. And so investors need to see that they hit that. So, CFOs and their teams, they want as much predictability as possible. Now, they also know that they need to support the business in being agile, being able to scale quickly, being able to, secure their environments and all that. Like, they fully understand that. It's not that they're resistant, but they're kind of, challenged with, okay, if we move, infrastructure that maybe in the past, we've owned all of it, it's a fixed asset. We're really good with capital planning, like looking out 3 to 5 years and planning out our data centers and stuff like that, or at least good enough. And now it's like, well, let's move to this model where we basically, open up accounts with Amazon or Microsoft or whatever, and we don't know what tomorrow's bill is going to be. That's frightening. That you think about this. To do the, buy in the old world, you would open a purchase request. Somebody would review it and approve it, and it would go into the system, and that would generate the order that was sent to the vendor and all that. Well, with cloud, you don't have any of that, and so it takes the control that's necessary out of that established process, and it puts it into really engineering. And so that's, I think, the fear or the concern. Again, I think most are aware that they need to adapt to it. And I think that's the beauty of FinOps, is FinOps has provided, not a high level, hey, this is kind of how you do it. It's been very specific about how you address it. So that's, certainly the good news. And then, Nathan, another, challenge for some companies more than others is, some companies like having assets. They like having capital. They're capital intensive. They're measured on capital. You've got ratios in banking and financial services that, from a financial statement perspective, looks at like, what are your assets? And it's not all just financial assets. Some of it considers fixed assets. And so when you move to a subscription model, you lose all that. Like, you don't own the Amazon servers. You're renting them. And so that can be a little bit of a concern. But I think savvy not only CIOs, but CFOs, they've recognized, this future that we've entered into, and they know that, this is the right model. And so I think they're supportive of it. And I think knowing that there's FinOps and the tools that are available for FinOps out there really helps assuage those concerns.
And I mean, you mentioned things like assets, owning a server. Should that really be these days considered a liability? Because, it's basically tech debt. Do we sort of just need to shift the focus on things like that a little bit more to sort of assist that conversation and perception?
Yeah, I think so. And, what a lot of business leaders want now, finance people, again, like the predictability. And of course, they want to see the attainment of financial goals around profitability and things like that, and growth, of course. But on the other hand, you have like line of business leaders, and a lot of them really want to tie their consumption, their volumes, to their costs, or tie the cost to the volumes, right? So they say, look, in a good year where revenues are up, we're okay paying more for infrastructure. When revenues are down, we'd rather not pay that much for infrastructure. So cloud helps with that, right? In a way that owning your assets doesn't allow. So aside from like what you described about a liability from kind of a tech debt and risk and things like that, it also is a drag on the earnings, primarily when volumes go down, right? When volumes go down, if you own your assets, that's where you're going to pay the same rate that you did last year when maybe your volumes were up. So there's some advantages like that. And again, I think, savvy CFOs know that. So I think, if you have a CFO that is in the way of public cloud, there's probably just an education gap, I suspect. But there may be some real concerns around capital, thresholds and stuff like that.
Yeah, excellent. All right, we're going to take a quick little break, and we're going to go for our speed round questions. This is where we get to know our guest a little bit deeper, what makes them up, and add a little bit of entertainment into the picture. Are you ready, Todd?
I'm ready.
Alrighty, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Absolutely. Love it.
Attaboy. A cat person or a dog person?
Dogs. I don't understand the purpose of cats.
You're doing well. Red or white wine?
Red.
Excellent. Beer or spirits?
Can I have both?
Why not? There we go.
They sometimes go together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
It depends on the severity of the consequence, so it can be either. But we'll say I beg for forgiveness.
Excellent. Your favorite movie, director, producer?
Yeah, I'll go with director, Christopher Nolan, without a doubt. Love J.J. Abrams too, but Nolan's got to be at the top of my list. So then it's like any movie by him.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee. Black.
Favorite TV series?
Oh, I should have had one prepared for that. Probably, I'll give something that's more current, is The Boys on Amazon.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just fantastic.
Also a good poking fun at the whole Marvel and DC universe that's popped up. I like the view on that they've got.
Yep.
Favorite song, musician, genre, era?
Yeah, musician group is Pink Floyd. I'm a diehard Pink Floyd fan.
Your favorite food?
I'll go with kind of a class, sushi. I love sushi.
Awesome. Holiday, do you prefer active activities or relax and do nothing?
I like to work on stuff at home, like a staycation where I'm doing home improvement, stuff like that. Yeah, so not much relaxation.
Buildings and architecture or nature? What's your preference?
Nature. Yeah, at least for like relaxing. Yeah, it'd have to be like nature.
Your preferred superpower or supernatural ability?
Yeah, it's not very creative, but flying. Being able to just fly. Yeah, I'd have to be able to stay warm at the same time. I don't want to fly and then be freezing. So yeah.
Your favorite vacation location?
Yeah, it's funny. Same kind of answer as before. Is a lot of it is just home. Being home,
Yep.
being with family and chilling out. So yeah.
Well, it's good that that's a vacation for you and not a stress, which is
great.
Yeah. Your childhood nickname?
My middle name is Earl, and I had a cousin who would always call me Turtle because of Todd Earl. He'd say Turtle.
Yeah, nice. Your proudest moment?
So I've got 4 kids and married, and so I could include all of that. And I would, but I'll include something professional. I passed the CPA exam, which in the U.S. is known for its difficulty. It's 4 parts, and I passed all 4 parts at once. And I remember I was working for Ernst & Young, and I went into the office where it was during the winter. We were doing an audit, but went into the office and shared the news with some of my colleagues. Found out I was the only one who passed all 4 parts. And so yeah, I was pretty proud of that. Now I will say then there's a take-home ethics exam that I failed. Yeah, I passed it later, but I failed the ethics exam. It's basically one that asks you all these questions about independence. If your brother works for this company, can you audit a subsidiary? It's stuff like that. And I thought, oh, I'll get this. I don't need to work at it. And I had to take it twice.
Nice. Good that you got there. All right, so looking at the score, look, you're strong out of your gate and you've ended up with a 99.5. So half a point wiggle room for our next guest to work hard at the answers. So nicely done on that. All right, so back into it. Finance and the fundamentals. We spoke before about all these things, the stability, the predictability to report quarterly. We know that we need to build out things like budgets and allocate costs, but for me as a cloud person, why should I really care about that? Everything goes into one big bucket and then comes back out. It's all just virtual shifting and moving things around. It's not really doing something from my perspective. What is finance really looking to achieve? The earnings per shares and the budgets and all these allocations. What is finance trying to achieve? And, me as a FinOps person that may not necessarily care too much about the finance side of things, sell it for me. What are we trying to do and what's in it for me?
Yeah. On top of the kind of predictability and their reasons for doing it, I think what you have to think of it as anybody who's managing, a team, managing resources, managing, spend with any vendors, etc. Look at it as this is the way I get funding for all that. A budget is funding. A budget is, where you're requesting money, you have to justify it to the powers that be. But hopefully after that, you get so much money to spend and you can be held accountable within those guardrails. I think where companies need to adapt is redefining those guardrails so they're a little bit looser. And what I mean by that is not that the amount of money necessarily is looser, but the way in which they drive behavior. Because you might say, hey, we were planning on, driving maybe our infrastructure spend this way, but there's this new product from our vendor and it's better and we need to be able to adapt that way, but it's going to have this change. Well, you need to be able to do that and not necessarily have to wait for the next planning cycle or what have you. You need to be able to do that very dynamically. So I think teams need the ability to have that flexibility in making decisions, be good stewards of the money, stay within the guardrails, not upset the corporate financials and things like that. But get the things done that they have to get done.
Yeah, so it really is just proactively proving that you're doing the right thing versus having to jump through hoops. And one thing that I normally struggle with as well, FinOps, we do some of our magic work that finance loves about us. We go and find $100,000 a month savings of overspend and we cut it. I was the one that found that. I found you, the business, $100,000 a year. That's over $100,000 a month, $100,000 a year, over $100,000 a year. Yet I get nothing for that. Like personally, I don't get a pay rise or a bump or anything. And you're not giving me any extra people to solve this challenge. So I think that's where friction starts to sort of appear, that I'm doing this great work and saving lots of money, but nothing's coming back. How do you sort of get a better perception on that sort of specific problem that, high five, you've done great work, you've saved money. How should we be looking at that?
Yeah, I think it's all about incentives, and it doesn't always take like a bonus for somebody who saves money. But I do think a CFO working with a CIO and kind of how they structure things, what they really need to do is by giving a certain amount of latitude, really encourage teams to save to spend. And I'll give you an example. Like we see a lot of organizations, they move to a product model, or maybe they call it a service model. It's a little bit semantics, but you have somebody who's like a product owner or product manager, and give that person some latitude that if they see, hey, I could save money here in order to accelerate an outcome here, and do it all within my sort of budget, within those guardrails, within whatever funding has been given to me, that's a good thing. That will encourage them to drive some really good outcomes. And so we've seen in that model where some of your biggest, the application rationalization, like a lot of your biggest application rationalization outcomes come at that level, not from some high level, app rat program, but actually giving the teams that they're near the coalface, as we like to say, like them the decision making authority, so they can look at their underlying technologies and they can be like, you know what, we don't need these two because they do the same thing as this, and we can just consolidate, rationalize onto that. We'll save a bunch of money and we'll have a better outcome at the end. So I think it's all about empowering teams to make decisions like that and benefit from directly from some of those decisions. You'll drive greater behavior that way. The problem with go find us money is many companies are disincentivized for that. Like a lot of people, even if it's just pride, it's like, hey, I've got a $10 million budget. I don't want a $9 million budget, because if I save money this year, they're going to take it away from me for next year. So you can create that kind of perverse incentive with just that kind of model. So it's complicated, like no doubt. It's not a simple thing to solve, but I do think both finance and tech leaders need to think about that. What are we going to do to incentivize teams to continuously optimize? It shouldn't be a one and done. It's got to be a continuous thing where they're always looking at the value that they're getting. How can we, sort of keep the house clean?
Yeah. And I like your comments on that in terms of, removing duplication, removing spend. Like, as an ops person or an engineer, I'm no longer looking after two different systems doing the same thing, and I can free up some time to work on some cool stuff. So I think that's a great outcome I wouldn't have really thought of, that you can drive consolidation and efficiencies in products, which will then actually fall down to an operational thing and remove unnecessary work as well.
Yeah. And Nathan, I do think the Amazon way, I'll use that example. I used to use the Walmart example. Walmart has this mantra of everyday low prices, that prices are always falling, right? Well, I think Amazon with like AWS has really instituted that in our world of tech. They are constantly driving efficiencies in the delivery of those services, and you'll see the price performance continuously get better. And I think that's something we as technologists need to constantly seek. But I think we need to look at it more than just, are we saving like the cost of what we deliver, or are we instead optimizing the business itself? That's the way we all need to think. Are we optimizing the business? Because sometimes by spending more on tech, you can optimize the business process, right? It makes sense. Like if you have a, customer support process that today requires somebody to pick up the phone and do all this stuff, and tomorrow you can have it, like it's a predictive kind of model. It automatically resolves the customer's issue before they even know they have it, never touches a human being, creates a log entry, and that's about it. That's a better experience for the customer, and it's a lot cheaper for the company, right? So why wouldn't you invest, even if it's going to cost you, a bunch of money up front in technology? I think that's the way we constantly have to think as a business, is how are we optimizing for that kind of outcome?
Yeah, gotcha. All right, so we'll normally cut here and go to a quick mailbag from the previous episode. This is where we get feedback from our viewers and answer questions from the previous episode. So we'll cut to mailbag now. All right, and welcome to the mailbag for the previous episode. This was the episode that we had with Sarah and was all about getting set up technically for your organization. So let's jump into the mailbag questions. So first question, what about other factors outside of utilization that can affect cloud costs? Things like memory, storage, network traffic, web services, software licenses, etc. For those, I think make sure you understand the current size and scope of the current issue and also the future projected issue. Is this something actually worth worrying about it? So I'd spend a little bit of time to understand the current position, really understand how much value are you missing out from these particular items. Is it a big enough problem to act on now, or will it be a big enough problem in the future that you need to plan for? So on the basis that you do need to act and look at these other factors, I would take a similar approach to things like unit metrics. Start small and build capability over time. Take one particular factor, implement a rough version of that, and then refine it over time, and then add other factors to that. Again, you're probably going to start to see the law of diminishing returns. The first time you implement, you'll get a lot of value, and then that's going to drop off as you increase the amount of effort in that. Second question, what are the tools out there to help you with synthetic tagging? I would probably, again, same as the previous question, let's just put a pause. Is it worth doing tagging? Do you need tagging? Or is it that you need the same insights that tagging would actually provide? Think about how you currently get the insights you do from tagging, and think about the insights that you need from things that aren't being tagged. What are the tools you currently have, and whether or not you could actually use them to provide those insights without synthetic tagging. So maybe something like 2 graphs side by side with a slightly different information source may give you enough insight to be able to act and not have to go down the rabbit hole of building out a lot of tagging. If you do need tagging and it has to definitely be done, speak with your vendors. See, when new features are going to be landing, or how you can implement tagging with their particular services. If you're going to go DIY or do it in-house, make sure you're weighing up the cost of developing and maintaining a tool long-term before you build it. Things like the FinOps Foundation, ping how other people have solved these problems. Look to things like open source. Netflix has their Simi and Ani set of tools, which are now deprecated. But that style, there's a lot of things out there that people are sharing on things like GitHub. So look to those solutions. They're going to be easier to build. You've got a larger team from multiple people trying to maintain that solution. It's going to be just as good, and it's going to be a solution that you're going to have help maintaining as well. Okay, on to the next and final question. How strict should the controls be when we're talking about putting controls on resource usage, and when should they be that strict? I'd say, you really need to start with some form of control pretty early. You want to make sure you're setting that line in the sand saying, we do things properly here. It's not the Wild West. There are controls in place. You can't just do what you want without repercussions. So make sure you start with something, again, make sure you start with something very, very broad. Things like locking down regions or particular services, they're going to be that sort of catch-all safety net. But also make sure that you have efficient processes. Make sure you monitor and improve them. Controls should only be hit occasionally. If you're hitting controls too frequently and they're stopping a lot of work and they're creating friction, then maybe you've got the wrong control in place. So make sure you're aware of that and you're actually monitoring the controls that you have. And as your capability increases, maybe you need to remove certain controls as well. So if the people are being good with their services, you can start to relax controls because they've proven themselves to be good users and they're not really providing a safety net they sort of assume to be. Are they too strict? Again, I'd say, it's a good approach to say that, the controls are either right or wrong. They're in line with your business requirements or they're not. Are they too strict? Sort of comes back to that sort of question around friction. Are they causing problems because they're wrong or they're actually right and people aren't getting enough feedback? So make sure you've got that efficient process. You've got a feedback loop around a limit or a control. So the person knows that they actually hit a limit or a control and they get, some feedback very quickly so that they can rectify their actions. So as soon as they hit the control, they know the control they hit. They also know what they need to do to work around that control, file for an exception, make sure that's really efficient. I think it's going to be painful if it stops people from working for extended periods, but if they hit a particular control or a limit, they can easily and efficiently find out a solution and continue to work. It's not stopping them from working. So I think make sure you've got the right level of efficiency in your processes when you do have controls, and that should alleviate most of the concerns. Again, if you have any questions for the mailbag, feel free to reach out to us, feedback@finopsfridays.com. Thank you, and back to the show. All right, so we're talking a little bit there around some of the fundamentals. Todd, is there some basic fundamentals or some learnings that a FinOps person really needs to have about finance? You mentioned all these acronyms, your EPS and whatever else. Is there some recommended learning that a FinOps person should do an accounting 101 or a business something 101? What would you say would be the sort of minimum set of understandings a non-finance person that's in FinOps needs to understand about finance, and where would they get that sort of information and knowledge?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at the very least, it's important that you understand, first of all, how what you do impacts your corporate financials. So like, hey, if we spend this money, where does it go? And it's not complicated. That's something I think that is fairly easy to learn. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing is to understand the impact on TCO of things like, applications or products or services. Like, how does what we do impact the cost of the things that our business ultimately consumes, right, and uses? So that's another thing. That's one area where I think TBM and some of the things we do through the training through the TBM Council, can really help. And then, I think just understanding the budgetary process of any company, because you're going to have to follow it. So it's like understanding kind of those almost procedural technical things of getting the budget done is going to be important. Now, where to go to learn some of those things, I mean, that is a little bit the tough part. We have through the council a course that's called Financial and Business Management for IT Professionals. We honestly, right now, we only offer it about 2 or 3 times a year. What we want to do is turn it into just a virtual, like on-demand course. That's a goal that we have for 2022. But I actually developed it. It really was just something to teach IT professionals a little bit about that other side. And our mantra with that is not to take tech people and turn them into financiers, right? It's not to make financial people out of technologists, but it's to give them just a good kind of foundation that when they're speaking to a finance person, they can kind of speak in common terms. And I think, by the way, finance people need to do the same thing. So it kind of goes both ways. But that is something that could help. I wish I could say it's something that was either already available on demand or it was something that we offered regularly. But if somebody is truly interested and wants to reach out, I'd be welcome to talk about it.
Awesome. And I'll paint you with the wide brush of being a finance guy. IT, we love to roll out new systems and applications, and we will provide training to the business. Is a simple answer to this just a case, well, hang on a minute, finance now just has to do some training for IT. Set up a couple of sessions with your finance team where they teach you about some finance 101, and they teach you, I guess, about the subtleties of the way that they do finance at that particular company. Is that a feasible sort of solution?
Yeah, it is. And we see that, fairly often where they do that. And so, you can do it through brown bag lunches or whatever, right? There's a lot of ways to kind of do that sort of thing where it's not overly burdensome, to folks. I think if you're in, maybe the technologist shoes and you're listening to this and you're not seeing that, ask for it, because your finance people just may not know. A lot of companies don't really have an IT finance function. So that's the other thing is you could be, adopting public cloud services and moving a lot of workloads over, starting to spend a lot of money. And that may be very foreign to finance because they've never had like a real IT focused or technology focused person. So know that they may also just lack some of the kind of skill sets. But if you don't raise your hand and ask and start looking for that, they'll never know to maybe even provide it.
Yep. And just finally, in terms of the relevance of some of the traditional finance, I love to gripe and I hate budgets, this sort of very strict governance structure that's been put on the cloud. A great little article that, the word budget came from when we sailed ships around the ocean, and it was the French word for the little pouch of money they had to buy things. And I'm thinking like, we're literally buying cloud services with a construct that was built hundreds of years ago when we sailed ships around the world. Are these things just not relevant? Do we need to remove these types of things? What would be your vision? What do you think is going to happen over the next sort of 5 to 10 years where we're going to end up with this thing called cloud? Obviously, there's still the traditional parts of business that exist. It's not just cloud, but are we going to see a very fundamental change in what finance inside of companies actually looks like because of cloud?
Yeah, I do think we will. And I think there's some things kind of driving it, which are, increased, automation of underlying processes that drive spending, right? And you're obviously seeing it with FinOps and with cloud that code can drive spending. But I also think the inverse of that is just the data that we get from these processes, whether it's from cloud billing data and usage data, whether it's from DevOps and automation around releases and things of that nature, move to agile models where you've got the way people are working is actually like it's you can see their work in the systems used to manage it, so what people are working on and how they're sort of burning down feature requests and story points and stuff like that. And so there's a lot more data you can throw at it. So where I see this going, and we see some doing this already, is where you've got a more continuous forecasting model. So imagine instead of a quote annual budget, you've got a continuous forecasting that's based as much as possible on data. And occasionally when you need to make changes to that, because maybe you need more money allocated to something, that's when you raise your hand. You say, hey, we're showing if we make this change that it's going to drive an X% increase in cash that we need. And so then you go and you make the case in those scenarios. It may not be during your annual planning process. In fact, that process may go away. We hear the term unbudgeting sometimes, which is this idea of like getting away from the annual budget, more to that rolling process and so forth. So yeah, I think data ultimately will kind of set us free. But it's not easy because not just the complexity involved, but business is unpredictable, right? So you could say, hey, we got this model that forecasts out 3 years, but come on, how many of us hit a 3-year type of forecast? It's good, it's directional, we know we're going in that direction, but it's going to change. So you have to have that sensing in place to go there. But I think that's definitely the way of the future. It's you're going to see more of that, more of data driving the process, as opposed to this sort of very manually intensive kind of once a year exercise that for many takes months, right? It's not just a 2-week exercise. It goes 3-4 months just to plan and get to the budget for the next year.
Yeah, and that's one of my points I always love to make in terms of, we need to do all this forecasting. How did all your forecasts in 2007 look the year before the financial crisis kicked off? And the same thing in 2018. So I really question how valuable are those things? Because clearly we can do without them.
Right. Well, I mean, think of this, Nathan, that when you build a plan, the good thing is that when a change happens, you can react because okay, here's where we were going, here's the things we were going to do. We now know, well, those are the things we can change. Like, it does help create that transparency you need to make the decisions when something changes. And I think that's a positive. But again, that doesn't always rely on planning. It also can be done just by the things you do to create transparency into your actual, operations and spending, which both FinOps and TBM do.
Yeah, so viewing that more as an open framework, well, here's the projected path, but we can alter that and change course and correct as we go along.
Yep. And the key is just making these processes like that not so onerous and labor intensive and all that you either discourage that work from being done, or it becomes terribly error prone or frustrating for people because you want to retain good people, and all that. You want to make this as easy and seamless as possible. And that's, if you think about TBM and Apptio, Apptio's always kind of approached it from really two sides. One is the sort of looking back, like what have we spent, what have we consumed, what have the cost of things been, and then looking forward from a planning perspective. And a lot of that is, it's just easing the process, right? It's taking things that were very manual intensive and making them a lot easier on the people that have to do it, whether it's providing them the data so they can to come up with the right numbers in their plan and so forth, or it's simply automating the gathering of their inputs, from dozens or, sometimes hundreds of different kind of budget owners. So there's things you can do to ease that, and it'll go a long way. But it's still probably a far cry from where maybe we'll see in 5 to 10 years, where there's a lot more data driving that kind of continuous forecasting model.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. So just a quick wrap up, Todd. Is there anywhere you'd like to point if we want to find out a little bit more about the TBM Council, get a little bit more information? You mentioned some learnings there. I think there was a book as well. Where can our viewers go?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, join the council. The council is it's an organization that was founded by Apptio. It's a nonprofit, but it's open. Its membership is freely available to practitioners and executives and so forth. And it's just a resource you can use to learn more about TBM. We do have a what we call a TBM for Cloud work group, or what we call a strategy community. The idea behind that is, let's talk about cloud's impact on TBM and how TBM can address some issues there. How does it partner with FinOps and things like that? We've had Ashley Hromatko from Pearson, join and present, and just it's been, very welcome to our members to learn about FinOps. But I think FinOps Foundation members should think of it as, hey, this is a great way for us to learn about TBM and just get from it what you want to get from it. So that's another thing. And if you want to read a book, there's a book right there. It's an orange book, Technology Business Management, that I had the fortune of writing. Now, mind you, it is what year are we in? It's 5 years old. It's it's got a few years on it, but I think the principles there are really sound. One of the things that it talks about, and we talk about a lot in our community, is we created a taxonomy. It's called the TBM taxonomy, and think of it as really a set of languages. It's got, a financial language kind of at the bottom. It's got more of a tech language in the middle, and then it's got more of a business language at the top. We continue to evolve that, but the principle of that is that it helps with, modeling costs and translating between those different perspectives, so that people can obviously make decisions and do their job, whether they're finance people or they're tech people or they're business people. So that's something that is worth a look at. JR and they wrote about it and just kind of scratched the surface in the Cloud FinOps book. But it's been adopted very, very broadly. And it's a standard mechanism in the U.S. federal government. It's required by the Office of Management and Budget here when you're submitting a budget request for technology. They're required to put it in those terms. So we've seen that. We've seen it more recently adopted by the UK energy sector. It's got some legs. But we're continuously looking at it and how that will evolve. But it's a good thing if you just kind of want to see what TBM is about. That's a tool that can be very useful.
And just another great tool to actually understand the people that you're going to be working with and how they think and how they view the problem. So that's excellent. So thank you very much, Todd. That is a wrap on today's FinOps Friday. If you've got any feedback, any questions you'd like myself or Todd to answer, please send us an email, feedback@finopsfridays.com, and we'll address it in the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can also catch us on YouTube. So thank you very much, Todd. Thank you for being the guest.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Really appreciate it.